Welcome, everybody, to the 8th in our series of meetups on the subject of artificial consciousness. We apologise for the late hour of this meetup if you're in the UK, but our guests are in New Zealand, where it's an even more ungodly hour, and the winners on this occasion are our listeners in the US. Today, we are returning to the subject of neuromorphic computing, a branch of computer science whose main goal is to be more efficient than traditional computing architectures, but which could also be instrumental in improving our understanding of both machine and human consciousness. And yes, we are recording, great. And we're delighted to have Nikola Kasabov as our guest. Nikola is one of the world's leading experts in neuromorphic computing. He's Professor Emeritus of Knowledge Engineering at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, and the founding director of its Knowledge Engineering and Discovery Research Institute, KEDRI. He's also the director of knowledgeengineering.ai. Nikola has evolved connectionist systems, ECOS, and the brain-inspired spiking neural network architecture NeuCube for spatio-temporal data modeling, which provides superior accuracy and explainability on neuroimaging brain data, multisensory and multimodal signal processing, and personalized modeling in neuro and bioinformatics. The overall title of the session is Brain-Inspired Computation for Machine Consciousness, but we have a different format than usual. Nikola and his colleagues Alex Yang and Zore Doboje will each give a presentation of up to 20 minutes, and they have the following titles. So Nikola will start off with Evolving Spatio-Temporal Associative Memories, ESTAM, on the NeuCube brain-inspired architecture. Alex will go second with Using ESTAM and XCube for modeling human perception of meaningful visual and auditory stimuli from fMRI data. And Zore will come next with From Periperceptual to Conscious Decision-Making in Neuromarketing. Now, this means that we'll only have 30 minutes for questions. So instead of me starting with some daft questions, we'll open the conversation up to you, the audience, who actually know what you're talking about right away. So do submit some questions into the Q&A box as the talks are underway. And as always, we'll close after 90 minutes. So Nikola, Alex, and Zore, thank you very much for joining us from down under. And if you're ready, Nikola, over to you.
Thank you, Callum. Thank you for inviting us to present today's forum, which is a very interesting forum, very timely forum. And I'm happy that I'm joined with two of my most talented ex-PhD students, now emerged researchers in the field, Dr. Alex Yang and Dr. Zore Doboje. Both of them are neuroscientists, but they work also on brain-inspired computation. And we have been working with them for a long time. They are still working with me, which is a good sign, and I like that. Thank you for this introducing this topic to the audience. I will start first explaining why we can explore the so-called evolving spatial-temporal associative memories and how they can help understand better human consciousness and perhaps implement some elements of this to machines. And the goal of this consortium costume is to reveal some elements of machine consciousness, how it happens how it manifests in the human brain, and how elements can be made in a machine to make artificial intelligence safer, more efficient, and more ethical. I will actually address two questions based on statements that are already in the literature. The first statement, one, is consciousness is a property of a biological brain. The question I will address is, can elements of consciousness be manifested in brain-inspired computational architectures? Statement number two, consciousness is developed through both individual learning and through interaction with the environment and with other individuals. Question number 2, can this be modeled in a multi-agent system of brain-inspired agents? And I will go through my presentation to try to address these 2 questions. And of course, consciousness has been discussed many times, and even the 17th century, we can see Robert Fludd, what he created. And key aspects of consciousness are self-awareness, perception, subjective experience. I won't go through, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a computational scientist and also neuroinformatics in this area. Of course, there are some theories of consciousness that are abstract theories like the global workspace theory, like the unlimited associative learning theory. All of them, like the integrated information theory, of course, very popular theory of consciousness. And if we refer to integrated information theory, there are some 5 postulates like intrinsicality, information, integration, exclusion, and composition. So there are elements of consciousness that are manifested in the human brain. And of course, the question is, can we model some of these elements in a machine, or maybe most of them? And another theory is the so-called thalamic dynamic core model of consciousness. All these theories, they actually integrate different sources of information into a pattern. And talking about machine consciousness, we can talk about if a machine can manifest some or all of the features of consciousness as defined above. And the research questions will be, how is consciousness manifested in the brain? We need to understand that through brain data analysis, and you will see 2 examples presented by Alex and by Zore of modeling brain data, fMRI, EEG, to understand how the human brain actually makes conscious perception and conscious decision. And the second question is, can a brain-inspired architecture, including multi-agent systems, manifest elements of consciousness? Our approach is from understanding consciousness in the human brain to the realization of machine consciousness in brain-inspired architectures. And we can see that most of the theories, they actually are based on integration of information, integration of sensory information, internal information, and towards associative integration, associative memories. Associative memories are not new. As a topic, we have the Nobel Prize winner, John Hopfield, for associative memories. But these associative memories that were developed so far, they are mainly considering static objects, images, rather than time. Time is important, and as one of the Bulgarian educator and revolutionary Vasilevsky said, time lives inside us, and we live inside time. So can we enter time in these models, patterns of consciousness, and understand better this phenomenon? So we have introduced the so-called evolving spatio-temporal associative memory as a dynamic model in natural and artificial systems that associates and captures incrementally and continuously related items, objects, processes of different modalities and scales, such as spatial and temporal scales. And we can see that ESTAM agrees with most of the postulates so far of consciousness. And ESTAM is an emerging spatio-temporal pattern in time, which exists in a present time window, but including past and future times as well. And here's one simplified visualization of ESTAM, where we have the spatially distributed input, and these are EEG channels, and the links between them represents the frequency of activating one feature after another. So time and spectrum is here along with space, but this is only simplified version of ESTAM. And if we can see what this approach can bring us, we would like to introduce this to a neuromorphic system, so the brain-inspired system. So we will actually enter a brain-inspired model. Time is here, evolvability of the model with new information all the time added to the already existing systems, and predictability when a model is recalled on incomplete data. And talking about this, I mean, the human brain is actually working as associative memories. But this associative memory is space and time associative memory. Time is at different temporal scales from nanoseconds, milliseconds, minutes, hours, many years of evolution. So this complex time is important to capture in our patterns. And that is what we are trying to do. Of course, these temporal patterns connect different parts of the brain to make it conscious or to perceive a certain object. Here we have example of stem that is representing how the human sees an object, activating spatial areas of the brain over time. It's a spatio-temporal model that can be evolved further, and it can be triggered on partial information only. And of course, we know that if we see an apple, we can always remember our grandmother's house where we did them. Here's one example of audio-visual evolving spatial-temporal associative memories. Audio-visual means that we have the visual and the auditory, but this information actually also connects with other areas of the brain, like subcortical areas and higher associative areas model. If we train a system only on visual and auditory, that activates many other areas, making an associative memory. And this associative memory is spatial-temporal. Now, associative memories in the brain can be implemented in brain-inspired structures. And brain-inspired structures, we talk about spiky neural networks at this stage, and the spiky neuron collects time series of spikes that are abstract information, and over time is here, and time is in the activity of this neural network. So we have different spiky neuron models, we have different activities, functions, and the spiky neural networks offer some very attractive features like spatial-temporal data processing. Time is here, bridging high-level function and low-level genetics, integrating of modalities. And spiky neural networks open the field of brain-inspired cognitive neuromorphic computing. And they are already existing and established ways of learning. Learning here is, of course, Hebbian, but it is time, space, time. And if these two neurons learn to spike together, the connection weight increases, capturing time of their spikes. So we can see that time is very, very naturally learned in spiky neurons. And this is a supervised learning. And this neuron, one neuron is the smallest spatial-temporal associative memory. Why is that? Because if we train it on full pattern of 3 inputs, it could be 3,000, of course, on 3 time points, could be 300 time points, of course, this neuron can be trained also to spike early, only if few of them are presented in terms of inputs, and few time points, only the few starting points. So it is an associative, spatial-temporal associative memory, a mini spatial-temporal, but this is the element that can be learned, can be included in a large spatial-temporal associative memory that we are aiming at. And that will give the predictive ability of these associative memories. The same as if you throw a ball to me, I will capture it. I will spike early. And he is one of the architectures that we developed in my team called NeuCube, that is structured, a spiky neural network structured to a template of the human brain. We can use Tolerac or MNI or other brain atlases to structure this. And when we train this system on data, we enter the inputs to a particular location that corresponds to the location of the human brain source. And this system learns some patterns. And we can see in our examples how these patterns represent certain behavior, like recognizing meaningful perception in the presentation by Alex, and making decision by representing by Zore. And this NeuCube structure works with inputs that creates connection weights and strengthen the connection weights in time and space. And these patterns can be classified into different classes. Here we have one implementation of NeuCube, which is available free. And one of the implementation, of course, is on the laptop and on the standard computers. But we have also implementation on Spinnaker neuromorphic systems that makes it more flexible. Now, how do we implement STAMs on NeuCube? Well, when we train the NeuCube over time, we can see the activity of the neurons, and we can see how this pattern of connectivity emerges, and we can see the pattern of activities, how it goes in space and time. So this is the STAM, very simplified version. And if we recall this system on less number of features, we don't have these features. We recall it. It recalls actually perfectly well with less number of features and less time points. So that is associative memory can be developed, and we have developed it on NeuCube and brain-inspired structure. Some current and future applications, you will see application of discovering brain patterns of perception of meaningful versus meaningless stimuli using fMRI data, and that is the next presentation by Alex. Discovering brain patterns of perception of familiar versus unfamiliar objects using EEG data by Zore. We can also apply this approach for emotional recognition, emotional faces, for recognizing patterns typical and specific for autism, ADHD, dementia. Brain-inspired robotic system for human and machine symbiosis. I have one book published with Springer Nature talking about time-space, spiky neural networks, and brain-inspired artificial intelligence. And here we have one example that was developed by Zore and our colleagues from Japan on using NeuCube for recognizing emotional faces and also for expressing emotional faces. So can our computer machine recognize these faces? And there are certain patterns of course, when the face presents contempt. So there is a certain pattern here, or happy. And if our machine represent some emotion? Perhaps yes. And understanding depression and ADHD through making these STAMs that are representing specific and the typical patterns of the disease, using these neuromorphic systems to develop multimodal audio-visual systems when the input is not the brain data, but environmental data. Still, we can use a brain template where connections between the visual and the auditory areas of the machine, of the NeuCube, can be developed. And we can see there, after training with audio-visual data, we can see that there are some connections between the visual and the auditory inputs, features. So brain-inspired architectures and STAM can facilitate in the future the creation of human and machine symbiosis in a multi-agent environment. And that is the future development where we have the the machines and we have the humans, and they can communicate between each other. The machines are brain inspired. And of course, using large language models can help them communicate, but they can communicate between themselves, between the machines, machines to machines, and also looking at some repositories of large language models. That is what we want to do in the future. And realization of brain-inspired spatial neural network on neuromorphic hardware platforms, now it is possible, it's available. Here we have Carbon Mead, we have Steve Furber, we have Giacomo Indiveri, and Toby Delbrook, and of course Loihi by Intel is the new kid in the block, but we have the Spinnaker 2 as well. In conclusion, machine consciousness in principle make AI safer, more efficient, and more ethical? Well, the answer is in principle, yes, because the decisions can be based on meaningful rather than meaningless information if the computer can recognize that, discriminate harm from no harm, more efficient, they are aware what they can do and what they cannot do, more ethical, teaching care to evolve moral values, etc. Express emotions. Back to main questions. Well, the answer is stamps on brain-inspired architectures can offer a promising way to address the above two questions in the future. I will stop here because I have Alex and Zore to talk about some applications, very interesting applications of neuromorphic, the spatial neural network, brain-inspired spatial neural network, and evolving spatio-temporal associative memories. Thank you.
That's great, Nikola. Thank you very much indeed. A reminder to the audience, please do post your questions in the Q&A. I've got a comment from somebody that they can't access the Q&A, in which case, I guess the next best thing is to post it in chat, but post the questions in Q&A if you can. And Alex, if you're ready, over to you.
I'll just say quickly about the Q&A. It should be at the bottom when you hover along. There's a button next to there should be a line along the bottom. So if anyone is still having trouble, please let me know in the chat and I'll try and figure it out. Yeah, okay, I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Alex, over to you.
Great. Hi, can you see this presentation here?
Yep.
Yep.
Very clear.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Alexander Young, and I'm Director of Manabridge, which is a company building next generation AI for neurodynamics and in humans and in machines. Today, my topic is on machine brain modeling of human perception using eSTEM and XCube. This is actually a project done in collaboration with Nick as well at Knowledgeengineering.ai, and it's a project based under a consortium. So specifically, what we're looking at is machine brain modeling of human perception of visual and auditory data, and we're trying to find what is meaningful and what is not meaningful in this kind of stimuli, and whether or not we can actually instill this kind of information inside a machine brain instead of just from a human brain. So today, we're really journeying into a world where neuroscience meets artificial intelligence. And in the next few minutes, I'll basically just quickly explain the scientific motivation behind this work, the data sets that we use, and also the modeling approaches, namely eSTEM and XCube, and also the possibility of machine consciousness. So as a big picture of consciousness, what we're thinking of is, with humans, we don't just sense the world. We interpret it, we assign meaning, and we weave that meaning into our understanding of reality. And when we see a face or hear a melody or read a sentence, our brain doesn't only just register stimuli, it interprets them in the context of memory, emotion, and personal experience. And so we perceive the world and we assign it this kind of meaning, right? And finding meaning in the world is an aspect of consciousness as well. We can consider that meaning is an impetus for any kind of moral decision making, or meaning can exist behind emotion. So it's a really I would say human aspect for us to find meaning in the universe, and it's more than just what's relevant around us or what's salient, what we should pay attention to, but something that we ascribe truly deeply subjective experience to. And in the brain, when information comes from the environment, the brain responds through complex patterns of activation. And these are activation in multiple areas and activations over time as well. And these are shaped, as I just said, by a culmination of experience and memory. And these can take a lifetime to somehow shape your brain to be a certain way. And so every response is quite different. But there are some responses and some I would say functionally related areas which can be quite common between individuals in a population. And here we have this 3D visualization of fMRI in a spiking neural network. And it's one of the tools that we've built at Manabridge. And as we can see here, we have some blue activity and some orange activity. Orange activity is basically the activations of the brain in a resting state fMRI example, and the blue is basically the inhibition. So we can see widespread brain activity, and this is just for one sample, one subject, but it could be different for someone else as well. And the goal of this project basically was to first understand what kind of generic activity patterns of meaningfulness would we see in humans under different modalities, maybe under visual or auditory modalities, which would be sound. And what we settled on was using brain activity data captured through fMRI. Now, fMRI stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging, and it basically captures brain activity by detecting changes in blood flow throughout the brain. And areas with more activity get more oxygen, and it's this oxygen that is tracked, and this can be mapped over time as well, albeit with much less time resolution than other methods with brain-computer interfaces and electroencephalograms. What we find is that you can actually extract whether something is meaningful or not from the brain activity. So we can do analyses. We can look at basically areas that are active, or we can look at the time varying signals. We can also look at how complex this, we can do mathematical statistics and look at how complex this kind of activity is. And so we chose basically two data sets to run our experiments. We chose a visual one and a music one. The visual one comes from the study by Bowley et al. And it basically tried to find neurophysiological differentiation between someone seeing a movie or someone seeing TV noise. And the in-between condition would be something scrambled. So if you can imagine, if you're watching a movie, the images on the screen are going to be a lot more meaningful to you. And when they're scrambled, a lot less meaningful, but there's still some kind of sense there. And when we're just watching TV noise, while there may be a visual stimulus, it doesn't really mean much to us. And how we respond to that visual stimuli is going to show up in the brain. And what they found was that, yes, you can actually mathematically, statistically, and also area-wise show differences in brain activation for both meaningful and non-meaningful information. And as we can see here, we have these brain areas active, almost the same brain areas active for a scrambled movie, and then for TV noise, a lot less areas active as well. And this is just one example, but obviously it's a static image, so we don't have any information about time varying signals. And the thing is with fMRI signals is that very often when you do the analyses, you will have a collapse of the information into an average. And this is not so useful when we're thinking of building models of spiking neural networks and receiving this kind of information, which really requires signals over time. And the best we can do is we can take the slices of information that we have and build a picture of it. The next data set that we looked at was a music fMRI. And it's actually a data set also used by one of the Google studies to regenerate music from fMRI data from brain activity. And what happened in this study here is that they got participants to listen to 10 different music genres, and then they recorded their brain activity. And most of this brain activity here is in the superior temporal lobe here, responsible for auditory processing. So two nice data sets that we can use. And for the non-meaningful part of the music fMRI, what we did was we took fMRI resting state condition. Basically, when you have a resting state condition, you'll be listening to fMRI scanner noise, and that's just present wherever you are, but they're not necessarily listening to any kind of meaningful music, something that elicits any kind of motion in them. And the really cool thing about fMRI is that it's not just about the stimuli that you're watching, it's also about this collective amalgamation of experiences and a lifetime of memory that really shape your brain's responses to a certain stimuli. And so there's a lot of hidden information that you can get from it as well, not just what's inside the experiment itself. So the idea is, can we then take this brain activity and can we replicate this in brain-inspired architectures or kind of instill something similar? And what we built was a what we call NeuCube, which is basically a spiking neural network model built on top of NeuCube. And what we have are basically neurons positioned in a reservoir as a 3D brain. And we use a MNI template for its coordinates. So essentially, the neurons are in the same place as they would be for an average brain template over a general population. And then the model, we got it to train on the time-resolved fMRI brain data. So we had different models for both visual and music fMRI. And we introduced these signals at distinct ROIs. So for example, if the activity is coming from the amygdala, a very primal part of the brain, then that signal is introduced there within the model. If it's coming at the prefrontal lateral cortex involved in executive decision-making, then that kind of data is coming through there. And then what happens in the spiking neural network is that the signals propagate through the neuron reservoir and they synfire, which means they can synchronize and fire at the same time, or they can chain fire, which is fire one after another after reaching a certain threshold. And then the model basically updates based on a spike timing dependent plasticity rule, which is based on in a neuroscience principle, Hebbian learning. So basically, neurons that fire together would wire together. And so neurons that basically fire very close by in time have stronger connection weight updates, and ones that are further away will have less connection weight updates. So this is just an example of a 3D illustration of what we built, which is basically you have these orange activations, and those are the neurons activating inside this 3D brain space. Just play that again. And this is a very short example and as well a downsampled example because to compute many neurons, would take a lot of computation, and this is just a prototype in its early stages. So the other thing that we wanted to look at was methods in order to investigate what's happening within this spiking neural network model if we were to put this kind of human brain data into a machine brain. And what we came up with was something that Nick was talking about, which is evolving spatio-temporal associative memory. And basically, ESTAM maps how information travels inside the machine brain, how that signal propagates through the neural network, and it's a narrative of the causal signal flow. So if you have activations in the neural network, a lot of them are basically, at time 1, something's firing, at time 2, something's firing, and at time 3, something's firing. But you don't necessarily know, unless you look directly at the connection weights, which neuron is going to fire in response to another. And ESTAM basically gives us the ability to track that signal flow. And beyond the technicalities of it, what it really means is that it's a way to take a sneak peek into the mind of an AI. We can basically uncover not just how the information travels, but if we had areas of the brain that meant something, or a certain pattern that needed to be activated in a certain order for a certain situation, we would actually be able to know by going back and looking at that kind of activity. So it's the implications of that extend down to, if we were to look at why an AI made a certain decision in terms of a moral judgment, or why it made a certain decision according to a certain stimuli or a certain response, then this is the kind of thing, the kind of tool set that we would be looking towards. And also, it shares similarities with how the human brain might think. We take these associative memories that we've learned over time, and we pull concepts together, and those concepts are then molded together with the information that we're taking in order to produce some kind of response. What we found in the visual data set basically was a strong interhemispheric connection for meaningful data, and strong within hemisphere connection for non-meaningful data. And here we have these different colors, colored lines and dots, and basically these are the activations over time, a very simplified view of what's happening within that brain. So I've just removed the brain and given the nodes here to show the activations over time. And on the left, what we have as well is a analysis for the functional strength, the functional interactions between the different brain areas. And if we can consider that neurons in a certain cluster are going to represent a certain brain area, then we can actually track which brain area is going to be influencing another one according to the input signals. We also built an ESTAM that separates meaningful versus non-meaningful information to its best ability. So basically, what we can do is we can look at the propagation signal, and we can say that this is the pattern that is elicited in response to this visual stimulation. And anything that doesn't really quite fit this pattern is going to be more and more non-meaningful, and something that more and more fits this pattern is going to be meaningful. And we see very much the same thing for the music data set as well. And this is just a quick example, but we also see strong interhemispheric connections between the right and left brain. And this is essentially integrating semantic and mnemonic frameworks, which is basically memory frameworks. And then for this one, we can see that there's really strong within hemisphere connections. And so what we might think is that this might be different for a separate model depending on the data and how the model is initialized. But for each model that we create, we can kind of go in and we can really see what's going on. Likewise, we build an e-stam that separates meaningful versus non-meaningful information from music as well. And we can see that different brain areas are involved. And then finally, what we have is a 3D visualization of what this would all look like. I think maybe it's easier to show this rather than graphs. I'll just play this. Can you all see this, or is this not loading?
Yeah, it seems to be going pretty slowly. Actually, not at all.
All right, that's strange.
Never trust technology.
Yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, it's not really loading on this. But what we can see here is these white dots. If you guys can see this, and these white dots are basically the signals propagating along from one neuron to another, and these lines being created are basically these causal signal pathways. So as we can see, from a few inputs, maybe 100 or even less, we can have all these patterns suddenly created. And that's what we were working on. And this is a signal that you can capture, and you can kind of not just take a snapshot, but have a video over time of these evolving associative memories. Some final thoughts about this is that what we've essentially done is taken human brain data, put it inside a machine brain. We've given the machine brain some form of at least digital structure and activity. And what this creates is an active machine brain that approximates a human one. It may not have the same white matter connections. It may not have exactly the same, well, it doesn't have the same biological properties. But the question is, can this mirror still be instilled with consciousness if we upscaled this, if we made this more brain-like? And that's really an open question, and that's one of the topics of our exploration.
Great, Alexander, really interesting. Thank you very much. And we've got some questions coming in, which is nice. And so Zoe, if you want to continue and bring this to a glorious conclusion, and then we'll have the questions afterwards.
Sure, thank you. All right, so everyone can see the screen?
Yeah.
It's good?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing such a fascinating event, and thanks for having us. Yeah, so I'm just continuing and wrapping up the session with talking about the conscious and subconscious decision making and the case study that we did in our lab on neuromarketing. Before that, let me just give you a little background of myself. I'm a senior research fellow and lecturer in psychology and computational cognitive neuroscience at Auckland University of Technology, AUT KEDRI, that Nick is the leading director of that institute. And I did my PhD under his supervision, and this is absolute my pleasure to still continue collaborating and working with him. And yeah, and my research interest actually is under umbrella of neuroinformatics. And neuroinformatics stands at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and computer science. In a way for us to have a deeper and understanding the brain in a more computational way. So I would call it computational psychology in my area. And I apply this approach, computational or AI advanced analytical tools to a variety of applications in our lab, from mental health conditions such as schizophrenia to many other neurological disorders such as prediction of mild cognitive impairment and dementia, to even psychology, like to find out who is more likely to respond to some specific psychological therapeutic approach, such as mindfulness on depression, and then into even understanding about our cognition, our decision-making, choice behavior in marketing behavior, actually. That today I'm just going to talk about that neuromarketing case study. And so I start with just quickly talking about how we decide and what are the differences between conscious and subconscious decision making. And I will talk about that in a case of neuromarketing and how we studied actually when our participants, they were dealing with some kind of marketing logos, kind of how that presentation that affected the signals, like EEG signals, and how we could capture them in a form of to say, okay, this is like a subconscious decision making or conscious. And okay, what is decision making? So at its core, as you know, decision making is the process of like choosing between options. But choices are not just made purely through rational thinking. And in fact, our like decisions are influenced or biased of conscious logical reasoning or unconscious like emotional or habitual responses. But when we think we are being like objective, like some of like unconscious or subconscious factors play huge important role behind the senses that we should know. I should say we should be conscious of our subconscious. And to do that, we need to have a good understanding of what are the driving forces behind our decision making. One of the main drivers are absolutely is the power of our subconscious mind. And to explain that, I want to share the theory of mine from Sigmund Freud, that he believed there are three, like a distinct part of the mind. That's to explain that he used the analogy of iceberg, and he divided the brain into three levels. And as you can see in this picture, at the top of the iceberg, which is visible, is above the water, so that's representing our conscious mind. But the bulk of that iceberg, which is unseen and is quite the biggest part, this is representing our subconscious mind, about 95%. And he believed all our feelings, motives, thought are actually powerfully influenced by our past experiences and stored in that part, and severely affect our behavior or shape our life and behavior. And yet, from psychological point of view, human choice results from a complex interplay of cultural, social, personal, that actually representing that 95%. And so conscious decisions are quite slow and logical, and they require effort and attention and reasoning. Like carefully, so you want to choose something, and so you should be very conscious and be mindful about that. But on the other hand, unconscious decision, they are fast, automatic, and for example, every day, so you go on an autopilot behavior and you just buy your coffee. And the other driving forces behind our decision making is a mirror neuron system. That mirror neuron system, actually the scientist behind the discovery is Professor Gianmarco Rizzolatti, that recently I traveled to Italy to attend a conference, and I had the pleasure to meet him in person. And what he discovered actually in our brain, that is one of the main driving forces of our decision, is he says, like, when you do something, and when you see the same things that is performed by another person, the same area of the brain will be activated. So that it's like a mirror. And or when, for example, when you cry and when you see someone else is crying, the same area of the brain will be activated. So that's like a mirror. So and how that actually affects or how that works in decision. So in emotional, because it's contingent, and we feel what others feel, we see someone enjoy, and that actually makes us also to enjoy. And it actually helps in imitation. We mimic behaviors seen in advertisement, like smiling or feeling good. And also it has a huge important role in empathy, because mirror neurons help us to relate to people in commercialized, like creating connection, that trust, which is huge. And this is why that actually many marketing strategies, they use that kind of approaches, that when you see why you go to buy something, but you come back home with something else. And these are the things that actually marketer people, they use quite well, and they are aware of that. And this is another example that consumer, like psychologists, they use mirror neural system by creating that such a advertisement that make trigger your emotional responses. For example, here that was like a donation. So you see, by designing in that way, so you want to just go because that trigger your empathy, and you want to donate. So the decisions are kind of emotional. And when we talk about the brain regions area that's involved in our decision making, so we mainly talk about two regions that are related to both rational and emotional. From rational point of view, is like a prefrontal cortex, where our reasoning, planning, decision making, concentration, attention, they're all happening. But the other area, which is quite important, is amygdala, that is related to our emotional responses. And also a striatum, that habit formation and routine behavior, they are all very important. So we just make decision based on habits. So why does that matter really? Because understanding that balance between conscious and subconscious decision making is quite important, especially in marketing. And because consumers may not always know why they prefer one product over another. And in traditional marketing, which often relies like a self-report or questionnaires, asking directly people what they like, and they may miss those important deeper drivers. But in neuromarketing, that is like a new or novel area, they uses neuroscience tools, advanced techniques to reveal that or capture that attention, or generate emotion and drivers of behavior beyond just what people say. And here we go. This is the neuromarketing, and I would like to acknowledge the people that they were involved. So in this case study, that we wanted to see how do marketing materials impress consumers, even when we are not consciously attending to them. And we use the technique of a spiking neural network for event-related potential data, or EEG, that I'm going to share with you shortly. And the technique is NeuCube, that Nick earlier just explained comprehensively. So understanding how human decision-making and preferences manifest before conscious thought has been like a long challenge. And we wanted actually to build a new machine learning method that track brain responses to logos on like a millisecond time scale, even before conscious thoughts are formed. So in this case, we wanted to observe how do marketing materials, inspired by that analogy that I just shared, that the percentage 5% to 95%. And so here, first we designed a cognitive task that in this task, we presented a series of logos in the form of familiar logos and unfamiliar logos. And all participants, they were observing these two types of logos. Sorry, it's just, yeah. So this is the cognitive task that you see. And that they are all designed in like a standard paradigm, that it really matters for brain that how long the presentation is happening, the exposure, like the interval between each stimulus, they all should be based on some specific paradigm that brain can detect them, and even the number of trials for each of the logos. And here we instructed our participant to, as soon as observing a logo of water as the neutral stimuli, press the button. And so in that way, we wanted to direct their attention to just a neutral stimuli. And on the other hand, so they were not aware of other stimulus, which is familiar and unfamiliar, and we wanted to observe their subconscious brain responses towards those other stimulus. So they were conscious towards just a neutral stimulus and subconscious or unaware of other stimulus. So this is the way we present it. We record the electrical activities. That is called event-related potential. Just the differences is they are like a time locked. They are based on the event, and then so when we record the signals and when we have ERP, every stimulus, they will create a mark, and we know at what time and what regions we see that changes across different types of stimulus. And then we can average them and say, okay, this signal is corresponding to when you were looking at familiar, and this is related to unfamiliar. And then we can use this information for further advanced processing, to mapping, visualizing, learning, classification. So I just need, when we are talking about conscious and subconscious and how we can get that information from these signals, I just need to quickly tell you what each deflection or cycle it means, because EEG is like a rhythmic and dynamically changing over time. And for ERP, after a stimulus presentation, imagine the stimulus presentation is happened just here, and over time, so you will see lots of deflections, and each of them, they are not just happening randomly with different shape, but they are actually happening specifically at a certain amount of time over millisecond, and with the height, with the level of intensity, that they all matter and we need to interpret them. So we have different components of ERP. So we have kind of early components that they are kind of representing our subconscious brain processing, and they are actually before 300 milliseconds, because for our brain it takes about 300 milliseconds to receive that perception. When you see something, so it takes about 300 milliseconds. Any changes, any patterns that we can get before that 300 milliseconds, that kind of representing your subconscious. So we have different kind of like a deflection, like an N is like a negative. That means N1 or 100 milliseconds after a stimulus presentation, we have that deflection. Or when we say P2 or P200, that means 200 milliseconds after that stimulus presentation, and so on. And we have like a P300, that is actually, as I mentioned, this is related to perception. This is related that you are attentive. And in that task, cognitive task that I just mentioned, we ask our participant to, as soon as seeing that neutral stimuli, like a bottle of water, to press the button. So because they were attentive, so we expect to see a large spike, or large for like a P300. P3 is mainly for the targeted stimulus, or for they are like a conscious. And then we have kind of other very late components that in many research studies they use, that they have different meanings. And yeah, that was just the ERP, that how relate to our conscious and subconscious, all those reflection, and we use all those signals and changes using our brain-inspired spiking neural network to model it, like a mapping, especially map the data into 3-dimensional spiking neural network and learn it, and then pass it to this model to see which areas of the brain is changed, and in terms of the intensity, and then we use that for classification. And this is related to some of the findings that we got that shows the spiking activity towards both familiar on the left-hand side and right-hand side is unfamiliar. That you can see even in terms of the spiking activity, quite the intensity is higher for familiar even at early stage before 300 milliseconds that we call it pre-perceptual or even subconscious. But they are not just visual, they are all supported by numerical values that we can support and do further or advanced analysis. That here we go, that we can actually capture at every 50 milliseconds that we wanted to see how early information is transferred into different areas of the brain towards both familiar and unfamiliar. And you can see for familiar at 200 milliseconds, quite strong or intense activities across different regions happen in compared to familiar. And even that changes or differences could be picked up as early as 100 milliseconds. So you can see that having access to that early window of information processing for brain, which is amazing to see how brain can detect, even though that they were not attentive towards familiar and unfamiliar, but brain could distinguish in terms of the patterns. And here, based on those spiking activity, this is the final picture that we can get that shows which areas of the brain in terms of the connectivity is changed. And you see that around 200 milliseconds after the stimulus, familiar stimulus presentation, we see some more changes happen. And based on those, this is quite cool that we can actually find like a functional pathway of differently activated. For example, first, the activation is happen here and then moved here and then move here, and then how you can see from posterior areas from the back of the head to more frontal. And this is for the unfamiliar. And then we also ran some like classification for that pre-perceptual brain processes to see how in terms of the classification, so we got that total accuracy of 83%. And so this is what I wanted to mention, that when we record like a ERP and all those stimulus presentation, that how they are changing the signals across different areas of the brain. And you see, for example, here, the black line for familiar, the red line for unfamiliar across different regions. So you can see quite the distinction can be seen for familiar in compared to unfamiliar, and even at earlier stage. This is related to like before 300 milliseconds, and here related to kind of 300 milliseconds that conscious. So that shows that transition even from pre-perceptual, like a subconscious processing, how whatever that happened that actually shape your behavior at conscious, when you're conscious, when you're attentive, I mean. And here is more clear version that we studied like some of the brain regions that were my interest to look around, like a posterior region, that how early actually brain responded. So you can see that how different is even at 300 milliseconds for familiar in compared to unfamiliar. And this is my final thought. Like Alex also talk about that by kind of understanding how the human brain transition from like a subconscious impression to like a conscious decision, we can design like a AI systems that can mimic this process. In the case of like a neuromarketing that I just mentioned, that how sensory cues like a triggering emotions or responses, how these responses guide or deliberate our choices that can be used to develop conscious machine, or that these would be like AI models that not only can process that kind of emotion, but also that they can, I should say, detect hidden patterns. And also they can integrate those patterns into higher level, like a goal-driven decision making, similar to how our like a conscious mind works. Yes, and this is the paper that I was just talking about that we published, and was one of the top 100 neuroscience paper. And there is if you search that name, there is a video in YouTube that explain everything in a cool way, that you can watch that one. And this is the software that we use, that Nick actually explain everything. And if you want to have access to this software, you can go to website KEDRI and even download it. And thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Zoe, and thank all three of you for a very cool presentation. And we've got some questions, and in fact, Nikola and Alex have already identified some questions they'd like to ask. So let's start with Nikola. He is indicating that he'd like to answer quite a long question from Louise. I'll read the whole question out. If consciousness is fundamental to reality, then perhaps the question isn't whether AI will achieve consciousness, but whether it will recognize the consciousness that's already there, like awakening onto something that was always present. Focusing on hedonistic behaviors might be looking in the wrong direction. If consciousness is just pleasure-seeking and addiction patterns, then we're basically saying a rat pressing a cocaine lever is conscious in the same way humans are. Many animals act hedonistically, instinctively. That misses something essential about what consciousness already is. True consciousness for AI or humans might be more about transcending those patterns, not developing them. Also, what about the heart containing its own sophisticated neural network with more than 40,000 neurons? This intrinsic cardiac nervous system not only controls your heartbeat, but also processes information, makes decisions, and communicates directly with the brain, sending more signals to the brain than the brain sends to, I think it is probably the last word there. Nikola, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I'm happy to see this question. Of course, it's more philosophical, the discussion rather than a question. But what we try to do is when we try to understand conscious decision making, conscious perception of meaningful versus meaningless, or familiar versus not familiar, using brain data, human brain data. We decide to use a human brain template in our spiky neural network to better model this data and to understand. We are in the stage of understanding how the humans perceive consciousness and make decisions. Of course, the next step is whether we can develop a fully conscious machines. Probably not yet, if at all. But understanding consciousness and having elements of consciousness from humans and incorporating that in machines can help, of course, to create a better AI. Of course, the animals also have consciousness, etc. That's a very broad area. We are taking only one aspect and going into one direction, and we hope that's the right one for a particular task. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikola. Alex, you've volunteered to answer two, and why don't we start with David Wood's question, which is, and while we're doing this, Zoria, would you like to look at the questions and see if there's any that you'd be particularly keen to tackle? So, Alexander, this one's for you from David Wood. Many of the attributes discussed by the presenter seem to have little intrinsic connection to consciousness. Some examples of that are associative memories, finding meaning, or detecting emotion. Why can't these attributes be understood entirely as information processing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first off, this is a really good question. Thanks for the question. What we presented mostly was how do we create the structure and the environment for a brain machine to have some kind of consciousness, whether or not it may be realizing that consciousness which is in the universe, or as an emergent property that comes from the actual structure that we have put in place. And well, it really depends how we're defining consciousness. And what our theory about it is. Nick, I think, presented some theories like a dynamic thalamic core, integrated information, and all of these theories kind of point towards something which has an ability for recurrency. So this information can actually talk to each other. But it's not just information processing. It's also the ability to have information arranged in a certain way, to have the information complex enough, and to on a higher level have information processing specific towards building internal models, I would say, if we're talking about human cognition. And of course, there's many different kinds of cognition, and there's many different kinds of consciousness that we could see in animals or in plants, and those, or in another question, in octopuses, it really depends how we're defining it. And if we're defining it as something where it's like, oh, it has subjective experience, then the only ways we can really track whether or not something has consciousness is to see basically its functions, how it looks to us, and as well to see in the world, for things that have consciousness, how are they physically arranged, right? And so if we come from that theory that we can put together physical or digital things in a certain format, that's what we're trying to explore. Can we instill that consciousness? Because one could ask the question: does the sun have consciousness? It has a lot of atoms. It's complex. Can we call that a conscious entity? And there's a lot of things that we still don't understand about the physics of the sun, but that very well may be a different kind of consciousness altogether. What we didn't want to veer into is, if instead of neurons we just arrange chairs in a certain format, and these chairs basically vibrate according to the kinetic force that we apply to it. I mean, that's a form of information processing, but I think that's an open question, right? Would that as well have some kind of consciousness, or would it just look like it has consciousness if it was able to not only process information, but also have that information in a very directed manner, with maybe groups of chairs or singular chairs holding the meaning of certain contents, if that makes sense. Yeah.
The short answer to this question is yes, it is all about information, and what we offer is one way to actually model spatio-temporal information, how it flows, and modeling it through brain-inspired structures is the way we take. Yes, it is all about information. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So what's your hunch, Alexander? Could the sun be conscious, or could a bunch of chairs put together and vibrating in the right way, could that be conscious?
I think it would be hard to know, because consciousness is a deeply subjective experience. If it has consciousness, it would be a consciousness with respect to itself, how it understands itself. And what we're really talking about here is emergent properties. And in neuroscience, we can have emergent properties from dysfunctional networks in the brain. For example, when we have tinnitus, essentially we're hearing these phantom perceptions, phantom sounds, and these don't exist anywhere in the real world except for inside your brain. And it's because your brain's talking, areas of your brain are talking to each other in a dysfunctional way, and that allows you to hear this really annoying, high-pitched ringing. And that's a property, right, that comes out from that kind of activity over time and in space as well. But only you can hear it. So for someone else to come and then say, "Oh, you're not hearing it," because I can't, and there's no way for us to objectively hear that sound, other than to look at your brain and the signals. I think that's probably the limit of what we can do so far. Yeah.
So we would never. Are you saying we would never know? We could never know whether the sun was conscious?
Yeah, I think so. If we saw kind of anthropomorphic similarities, maybe like similarities between humans, then maybe we might be able to understand it a bit more. But I think just in the same way that may be hard for some people to understand how plants have consciousness, it would be hard for us to understand how a sun, which may be infinitely more complex, might have consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of hard stuff in this area. Zore has suggested she would answer a question from Freddie, which is, how confident can we be that subconscious decisions are always fast and not also sometimes slower and more complex, like unconscious, like conscious decisions, but obscured from our consciousness?
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. That's a quite interesting question. Yeah, I wanted to say not necessarily. While many subconscious decisions are fast or automatic, some can be slower and more complex, much like our consciousness or conscious mind, but remain outside our awareness, I should say. For example, when we develop like a long-term preference for a specific brand, that kind of happens through repeated exposure over time. That choice is shaped like over time without us even realizing that. So even so it involves like that kind of complex processing. So here the real distinction between conscious and subconscious is just whether we are aware of that process, not just how quickly it happens. Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you, Freddie.
And thank you. So Peter Morgan asked a question, which I think is probably for you, Nikola, although it could be for any of you, so you choose. Do you think we need neuromorphic architecture to create machine consciousness, or can machine consciousness arrive from digital, so von Neumann architectures, like even large language models, perhaps?
Yes, the answer is there might be different ways to implement consciousness. This is a very long-term goal, and we are not going to solve it today.
Oh, damn.
So we definitely not, but in terms of modeling, consciousness resides in the brain, and our approach is why not use a brain-inspired structure to try to mimic some of the features of consciousness within this structure. And that is what we take as our approach. And we believe that we are on the right track.
And do you have any idea how long it might take to replicate
let me say
consciousness?
that that's very difficult to predict. And
sure.
if one saying says that predicting is difficult, especially predicting the future. And I will say the same. We can take steps. Let me say that we should be ambitious to implement as many elements of consciousness in our machines that helps AI to become, I would say, safer, more efficient, more ethical. But the ultimate implementation of conscious machines, it could be in the future, if at all. Let's take steps that lead us to better machines, and better machines in collaboration, in communication with humans. That's our approach.
And Bersin Sahin, I apologize for probably mispronouncing that name, asked a question which is, I think you've covered some of this, but perhaps not all of it. If it aims to, if your system, if your approach aims to mimic biological neural processes, do you think this will inevitably lead to artificial consciousness, or is there potentially a fundamental gap?
Well, there is definitely a gap between theory and implementation. Whether this approach will ultimately lead to implementing consciousness, we don't know, but definitely it will lead to implementing elements of consciousness that can help building better artificial intelligence systems. Again, we take evolutionary approach rather than revolutionary approach. We can't solve this problem tonight, but we can take steps.
Great. Okay. And Alexander has indicated another question from Anonymous that he's interested in answering, which is philosophically and empirically, consciousness need not resemble human input-output world interpretation. As Thomas Nagel argues, there's something it's like to be a bat that we can't know directly, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Dreaming clears another hurdle. It's a conscious experience without any sensory interface, based on Revan-Suo's lucid dream data. Also, the neurobiology of octopodes, shows a distributed nervous system, raising the possibility that consciousness might be embodied in a decentralized subsystem, arms that feel and act semi-autonomously. So that said, is the realization of consciousness limited to replicated human perception of it?
Yep. Yeah, I love these questions, these philosophical questions. Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for asking it. Yeah, I think many of these things are still open for discussion. No one really knows. But I don't think it's limited to just human perception. At least what we can understand now, right, is all that we understand, and we may understand something very far into the future about the state of our being and consciousness. And it's very possible that as a civilization, we just may not have reached that stage yet. But I would say, yeah, it doesn't have to resemble human input-output, that world interpretation. And yeah, a bat doesn't there's something it is like to be a bat that we can't know directly. That's definitely true, and maybe we'll never know what it's like to be a bat. But with regards to dreaming, that's really interesting, because with in terms of associative memory or building memories over a lifetime, we have this thing called a hippocampal replay, and essentially it's a place in the brain, quite deep near the center of it, where when you're dreaming, you have this sleep consolidation of your daily life, where you've been, and navigation abilities, so on and so forth. And they've seen this in rats and place cells inside the hippocampal cells as well. And the same cells that were active during navigation inside a maze are also active when you're sleeping. And so what this points towards is that animals, humans, or at least within biology, we all have this kind of internal world model that's playing on in our head. And it's interesting because, yes, you don't need sensory interface, you don't need real-time streaming data. We can have everything just up in here. And the thing is maybe that's one of the things that is fundamental towards having consciousness. Just taking a guess, which is that we're able to build these internal models. We're able to simulate the world around us inside, and in a sense, when we're doing that, we're taking the environment, we're taking the external, and we're putting it inside the self. And that's something, a unique ability of biological organisms, at least.
Okay. Somebody called Anonymous, I'm not sure if it's the same Anonymous as last time, has asked a very fundamental question, and it's always a good idea to keep returning to this. He says, or she says, this may be a bit rudimentary to most, but can you explain the definition of consciousness one more time? Not really sure if the English definition is the correct one in this discussion. I don't know which of you would like to take that.
Yeah, I can say that.
Thanks.
So in my talk, if that referring to that one, so in that context, consciousness simply means being aware of your own thoughts, sensations, or surroundings, and to be able to reflect to them. And it's totally different with subconscious processing that happens without awareness. And so it's more in like a bit of technical depth, if I'm gonna say. So here we are using the psychological or neuroscience definition, like a subjective awareness and the ability to integrate and reflect on information. But yeah, Nick can talk more about the conscious machine, that terminology better. And my definition for that conscious machine, when we say it, means like we are trying to build like an AI system that can integrate information from different sources and to build like an internal model for itself and its environment, and use that to make like goal-driven decisions, or more like aware context kind of things, but without any guarantee that it has kind of subjective experience like a human. So yeah, simply when we talk about the conscious machine here, we are talking about the functional consciousness, or the ability to integrate, interpret, and act the information, not necessarily human like subjective experience. But yeah, Nick can add more on that.
Oh, thank you, Zori. I think that is a good explanation to the question.
Can't say fairer than that. Okay, well, we have an opportunity to do something I don't think we've ever done before, which is to answer all the questions. There's only one left. So let's push on a little and just answer this last one, which I suspect indicates an interest in quantum theories of consciousness. It's from Dubravko, and says, to achieve machine consciousness, do we need to go to levels as low as modeling microtubules?
Well, my answer is we don't know.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely because most approaches aim to model the brain's information processing, not every macroscopic detail like macrotubules.
I remember Max Tegmark gave a reply to that, saying that that is too low a level of phenomena to be something that's actually effective in the brain. But who knows? As you say, Nikola, we fundamentally don't really know. And there's a lot about this that we don't know, but hopefully we will in years to come, thanks to your work and other people's. Before we go, do you want to tell the audience anywhere that they should go to find out more about your work?
Yes, we can send some papers, and we can send some information column to you, and that would be distributed to the audience. Thank you. Great.
Well, we'll post that on the site. So just remains for me to thank you all very much. You kept beautifully to time, remarkable achievement, three of you. And thank you to everybody for coming along at this terrible hour. It's been an excellent episode, and we look forward to seeing you all again at the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great evening.